I want to welcome everyone. Chodesh Tov, it's Rosh Chodesh tonight. And I want to have a special welcome to our speaker, Dr. Leslie Gutman, Abrahami. For professional reasons, she goes under her name Gutman, but her married name is Abrahami. Or you probably say Abrahami. I don't know. Did you want to correct me, Leslie? Which? You have an American accent.
I'm not sure how you're supposed to say it, to be honest.
Okay, well, you have an American accent like me.
I know.
So
I say everything wrong.
I'm going to feel very at home tonight. And we're going to tell more about her soon. Our subject tonight is the Torah perspective of resilience in the face of adversity. And it's a very topical subject right now, but resilience is always topical. It's a life skill. And it's something that we can use to deal with the challenges that we inevitably encounter from time to time. But now in the wake of the pandemic, I think it's especially even urgent as we contend with the wide-ranging implications of the epidemic, whether it's travel or inability to travel, family, jobs, recreation, health, shopping, friends. The list is enormous, really, really enormous. And it's also timely because of the season in terms of the Jewish calendar. So we're right now between Pesach and Shavuos, and it's the weeks of the Omer. And during the weeks of the Omer, we recall the tragedy of the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva. I would like to suggest that Rabbi Akiva can be seen as a paradigm for resilience. Rabbi Akiva lived in the harrowing years following the Churban close to 2,000 years ago. It was in the dark shadow of the Roman Hadrianic persecution. He overcame his own humble birth. His father-in-law, who was a prominent Jewish activist and philanthropist, Kalba Savua, did not support Akiva. He wasn't Rabbi Akiva yet. He was Akiva. He was a shepherd. He was an ignoramus. And he didn't support this 40-year-old man marrying his daughter, Rachel. He was illiterate. He was an ignorant shepherd. But he was inspired because he observed water cascading onto a rock. And he saw how the water smoothed the rock. And he said to himself, if the water can smooth this harsh rock, certainly Torah, which is compared to water, can penetrate me and smooth me. So he overcame poverty. He overcame his humble birth, his low status, his ignorance, and he rose to become the greatest sage of his generation. And then there was a pandemic. It's a respiratory disease. Interesting. The Talmud records how in a matter of weeks, all the wisdom, knowledge, inspiration, and guidance of Rabbi Akiva that he had implanted was gone and left the Jewish world numb. It was a tremendous loss, both spiritually and intellectually. The resources vanished. 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died of Azkara, evidently a form of respiratory disease. Although some have suggested they may have actually died at the hands of the Romans in their bloody suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Either way, the tragedy of Rabbi Akiva would have been enormous. I never could really relate to it till last year, where we just heard every day there were people gone. And we are told that the reason they died from this Azkara, perhaps a respiratory disease, was because of the lack of kavod, respect for one another. Interesting, the word koved and the word kavod, respect, really similar. The lesson is clear. Rav Yasha Ber Soloveitchik, writing in the aftermath of the Holocaust, he suggested that the highest expression of Rabbi Akiva's greatness may be the fact that he did not succumb to total and debilitating despair. Having suffered overwhelming tragedy of the death of his students, the Talmud records that the Jewish world was desolate. It was desolate of Torah until Rabbi Akiva went south, the Negev, and taught 5 disciples. It was these 5 disciples that established Torah at the time and forevermore. Vehem Hamidu Torah Otsa Sha'ah. These 5 people became the pillars of the Jewish world. So Rabbi Akiva lit the way during this time. Resilience, an example of resilience. Dr. Gutman has written a book on resilience. Now, I just want to remind you before I introduce her, so we will be needing paper and pen tonight. So grab hold of a paper and pen or pencil or crayons. I'm gonna move over from, because I know Leslie, and also because she's friendly and she's one of us. Dr. Gutman is also Leslie tonight, so she's very, very talented. She has written a book called Resilience, a Jewish guide to facing setbacks, fostering strength, and living your best life. It's published by Mosaica Press, and it's just come to the United Kingdom, which is great. It is available at several Jewish bookstores, including Torah Treasures. Divrei Kodesh and Edgeware is offering 10% discount off of the price of the book for anybody that says that they were on tonight's spiritual spa, and it has to be until the end of the month of April. So go for it. Leslie has authored over 65 academic publications. Her research focuses on developmental trajectories in childhood and adolescence, health, well-being, risk and resilience, aspirations, attainment, as well as is right from her website, as well as development, implementation, evaluation of interventions for children, adolescents, and families. She lives in Edgeware with her family and her children. I first met Leslie in 2003. Wow. When she arrived on British shores, Leslie told me that she's very proud of the fact that she became a Baal Teshuvah since becoming a mom to her 23-year-old, and her 23-year-old daughter is now expecting her first, which is quite exciting. So I think you're a little bit young to become a grandma or a softie, but that's also exciting. With resilience, you'll be the perfect juggler. Leslie is an associate professor in clinical health and educational psychology, and the director of the MSc Behavioral Change at UCL. And I'm very excited to have her. So now we are going to be learning about resilience. We'll be taking questions later, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks so much, Ruthie, for that kind introduction. Do you put my PowerPoint on?
With pleasure. Yep.
Thanks so much. Just put on the first slide. That'd be great. Hey. So anyways, thank you so much, Ruthie, for that kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here today speaking to everyone about resilience. And as Ruthie mentioned, much of my talk is based on my book that's just come out, Resilience, a Jewish Guide. Actually, it's Facing Adversity, not Facing Setbacks. I realized I wrote the title wrong before. Fostering Strength and Living Your Best Life, published by Mosaica Press. And really, writing this book represents the fulfillment of a long-awaited aspiration for me. Actually, I've been writing this book for more than 10 years. So it's really exciting for me that it's now out. And it bridges together my academic work on resilience and my love of Judaism.
And it's great timing too. Something
yeah,
it
was. Everything's
very good timing.
So I wrote this book with the motivation to offer readers a more resilient path. And my book is based on hundreds and hundreds of academic studies and provides evidence-based strategies that have been shown to offer resilience. And I actually wrote this book prior to the pandemic, but as Ruthie said, Now, with everything we're experiencing, all the challenges, all the uncertainty, it's so timely. And we really need the need to bolster our own resilience, and that of our loved ones is really heightened right now. So I look forward to really sharing some practical points from my book today and a few strategies to boost your own resilience. And I hope that really you come away from this talk with the idea that you really have this incredible capacity for resilience. Ruthie, can you switch to the next slide, please?
Yep, I'm gonna hope that it will work.
So
did it work? No, it didn't work. New share. Okay, new share. Nope.
If it doesn't work, I don't need to use my slides.
Well, we want it to work. Okay, so we're gonna try. I got a little lesson.
Okay, I'm gonna just keep talking, and if you get it to work, then that's great, because I don't want to waste everyone's time.
Okay.
So there's a Jewish belief that everyone has their own pekala. And pekala is actually Yiddish for baggage. In fact, we're born with two sets of baggage. In the first set of baggage is all our tough times, our adversities, our hardships, our traumas. But the second set, however, is all those advantages and the talents and the abilities that God has given us in order to endure those challenges that are presented in the first set. We're told that each person's pekala is tailor-made for them. So what that means is there's no challenge in your first set of baggage that you cannot handle. But at the same point in time, all of those challenges has the potential to bring out a better version of you. That first set of baggage, no, it's one back, Ruthie.
It worked. Okay.
Yeah, that's
great.
right. The first set of baggage filled with all of our hardships, that's opened for us. But the second set filled with all of our strengths, we need to open. And that is what resilience is. Resilience is opening that second set of baggage and discovering all those amazing strengths that you have, some of them that you didn't even know about. And it's these strengths that help you adapt and grow from adversity. So in my talk today, I'm going to unpack the concept of resilience a little bit more. But right now, I want you to engage in that writing exercise. So this is the time to get out your paper and pen, because it's really best to write your thoughts down. Okay, next slides, Ruthie, please. So I want you to think about a stressful and a difficult situation that you overcame in your life. Now, it's really important to focus on a circumstance that was really challenging, even game-changing. So, don't think about the time that you got a parking ticket, or maybe the time that your child spilled grape juice all over the rug during Seder. I want you to think about an event that really shook you to the core of your being. Perhaps someone you love or yourself were really unwell. Perhaps you had a really difficult argument with someone that you care about, and now there's a separation in your relationship. Or perhaps you experienced a significant downturn in your finances or in your work. You might even focus on how you coped physically and mentally with the lockdowns that we've just experienced. Now, I want you to think about what really helped you to cope with this situation. It's Ruthie, one, you went forward on the slide, so one back. So I want you to really think about what helped you cope with this situation, and to note down some thoughts to the questions that are on the slide and that I'm going to pose to you right now. So the first thing I want you to think about is what you did to help yourself. Now, you might think about your sense of, that you have a strong sense of your own abilities, and this real confidence in your own abilities carried you through. Or you might be just a real optimistic and positive person, and this was really helpful to you during this challenging period. Or maybe you're really a good problem solver and you're really pragmatic and you came up with some different solutions and you implemented the best one. Or maybe you just have a really strong sense of hope, a strong sense of faith in Hashem, and these really helped you during this time. So note down a few of personal strengths that really helped you. And now, after you've done that, I want you to think about the significant people in your life and how they helped you. So you might think about your family. Maybe they really rallied around you and they provided you with important and emotional practical support. Or maybe you have, a few really good friends and they were able to listen to you, and you were able to talk to them and they listened to you without judgment. Or maybe, your community was a big support at this time. They brought you meals, they gave you practical help. Okay, so now I want you to think about what was unhelpful during this time. So, maybe you felt really anxious or really insecure about your ability to cope. Or maybe you're really critical with yourself and that keeps setting you back. You keep reminding yourself of your mistakes. Or maybe you just distracted yourself with unhealthy habits, too much time on social media or late night snacking. Or maybe your family wasn't really able to help you the way you needed right now. Or maybe you have a friendship that was really difficult or maybe even toxic to you during this period. So now I want you to think about what you learned. With each adversity, we learn new things about ourselves and our lives. Maybe you uncovered hidden talents that you didn't know you had before. Or maybe you gained a deeper sense of gratitude for the things that you have in your life, your life, your family, your friends. Or maybe you developed a greater spirituality, a greater closeness to Hashem. Or maybe you even discovered a new life goal, a positive direction, a new activity that you really enjoy. Or maybe your relationships with others were enriched, or maybe even developed a new relationship. So I hope you've had time to write some things down. And I want you to take what you've written and put it aside for later, because at the end of the session, I want you to look back on it and we'll review a little bit of it, okay? Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So I want to unpack some of the misconceptions that I think surround the idea of resilience. So if you use a search engine and you look up the word resilience and you look for a definition, you'll find these words like toughness, recovering quickly, and bouncing back. And I don't know about you, but whenever I hear this, it always reminds me of a racquetball. You know what I'm talking about. You throw it against the wall in a racquetball court and it bounces right back to you. And it looks exactly like it did before. It might be a little dusty, but it's basically the same thing, right? But that's not the way that it works for us humans. I mean, when we experience hardship, when we hit against something hard, we don't stay the same. We fundamentally change with that experience, and we have the ability to learn, to grow, and rebuild. And resilience isn't about being invulnerable to pain. Adversity hurts. It's not about forgetting your heartbreaks or dismissing sorrows. And it's not about putting that pain that you experienced in some compartment in your brain and throwing away the key. What resilience is about is integrating these experiences into a new reality and creating a sense of oneness with your past and your present. It's about adapting and becoming stronger. Our trials haven't broken us. They've helped to form us into wiser and stronger people. And in this way, resilience isn't about bouncing back into who we were before. It's about bouncing forward into who we can become. Next slide, please. Second, resilience isn't a trait or an attribute, or anything we're born with for that matter. It's not something that some of us have and some of us don't. Resilience is something that's made. It's a set of skills that we learn and we develop over time. Also, resilience isn't a destination. It's not like learning to ride a bike. It's not like receiving a medal for a job well done. Resilience is a journey. It's a journey that we take throughout our lifetimes, where we transform our setbacks into new opportunities and new pathways. And like a muscle, we have to continually work on and build up our resilience so we can effectively handle any challenge that comes our way. Next slide, Ruthie. My last point is that resilience is not about being a superhero. You know, we hear the most incredible stories of people experiencing the most difficult hardships, and we think to ourselves, that is extraordinary. I could never do that. But here's the secret. You can, and you could. What is the most important takeaway message from decades of studies on resilience is this: people show the most astonishing resistance, recovery, and resilience in the face of the most challenging and traumatic adversities. The human capacity to recover and grow after traumatic events is far greater than any of us realize. It's not easy, but we can all do it. We can train ourselves to be more resilient through our feelings, our thoughts, our actions, as well as our relationships with other people. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, resilience is about adapting to and integrating new circumstances into our lives. It's not about being invulnerable. It's about bouncing forward into the person that we are meant to be. It's not bouncing backward into our former self. It's about taking a journey of learning and growing throughout our lifetime. It's not about reaching a destination. And lastly, resilience is the norm. It's not the exception. We all have the capacity for resilience. Next slide, please. The concept of resilience is something that's inherent in our Jewish way of life. In fact, Rabbi Moshe Luzzatto, known as the Ramchal, born in 1701 and a great Jewish philosopher, thinker, and Kabbalist, said everything in life serves as a challenge to test and elevate us. And we can gain some insight into what Ramchal is telling us by analyzing the Hebrew word for test, which is nisayon, and the Hebrew root, which is nes. Nes also means banner and miracle. Now, you probably know in the Hebrew language, there's no coincidences. Every word reveals the essence of the item it describes. So what do banner and miracle have to do with our life tests? First, what is a banner? A banner is basically a big sign that carries an important message. What about a miracle? Well, a miracle is a reminder that God rules the world. There are miracles around us in every moment of the day. You know, the birth of a baby, the setting of the sun, and even with coronavirus, we learned that our breathing is a miracle. But we're so accustomed to miracles that surround us every day that we take them for granted. We become completely oblivious to them. But Judaism teaches us that each person has a special role in this world. You have your own unique mission that only you can achieve. But in our lives, we reach stumbling blocks and we feel stuck. We're unable to move forward. But when we experience traumatic events, everything changes. They challenge our assumption of who we are and our place in this world. They force us to change our thoughts and our behaviors. Our life tests break those barriers that stand in our way, and they bring out capacities that otherwise would have remained dormant inside of us. You know, we can think about, like Ruthie said, we can think about Rabbi Akiva, we can think about our patriarchs, our matriarchs. We can remember Joseph, who through years of slavery and imprisonment developed his spiritual potential and became the second most powerful person after Pharaoh in Egypt. Or Esther, with her forced marriage, she became queen of Persia. And with her courage and fortitude, her position allowed her to save the entire Jewish nation from alienation. Their greatest challenges enabled them to become who they were meant to be and to accomplish their unique mission in this world. We too can triumph over our tests and be uplifted like a spiritual banner. This is our miracle. We have the capacity to change the world through our own resilience. Next slide, please. So I'm sorry, one back. Thank you. So what enables us to be resilient in the face of adversity? In other words, how can we ensure that our life tests uplift us rather than bring us down? Well, academic research highlights three sets of positive factors that have been shown to foster resilience and protect us from the negative effects of adversity. And these include things like personal strengths. This is things like believing in your own capabilities. We call this self-efficacy. Seeing your failures as opportunities for growth. We call this a growth mindset. Or viewing your life through optimist. I'll begin talking about learned optimism in a minute. Or coping with your problems in an active way. And having a strong sense of faith and hope, among many other personal strengths that I talk about in my book. There's also family strengths, and these are things like having a secure and stable family relationships, being able to communicate with your family in a positive way, and having a strong sense of family identity, again, among many other family strengths. And lastly, there are external support systems, which include things like having friends that you can rely on and inspire you and support you, and having a feeling, being part of a community, and also spending time in nature. But what you'll notice about these is that they're not remarkable factors. They are regular characteristics and experiences that can be found in some degree in most people and in most families. And what this tells us is that building resilience is fundamentally human. And what I mean by that is really resilience is all about recognizing and supporting our own growth as humans and building our connections with others and with the wider world. What is also important to really emphasize is that these factors aren't show-stopping one-time displays of greatness. And we can't say, for example, to someone, oh, I spent some time with you on your birthday in 2012. Isn't that enough? No, our strengths and our protective factors are practices that we have to engage in on a daily basis. And these experiences compound and build over time. So we can't build resilience based on a single or intermittent experience. Our own personal strengths and our relationships with others must be continually renewed, reinforced, and maintained. There's so many different paths to resilience, and research finds that different strengths are important for people at different times. So when we're facing a situation that's uncontrollable and unalterable and unexpected, then having a strong sense of faith and hope is really important. But when we're facing things that are shorter and more manageable, then active problem solving becomes a more efficient strength for us when we're dealing with that. But what's important to know is that there's no single magic formula for resilience that works for everybody in every situation. So you need to reflect on your own situation and consider, what do I need at this point in time? And in my book, I discuss more than 24 different strengths that have been found to bolster our resilience. And these include personal strengths, family strengths, and external support systems. But as Ruthie said, I'm director of the MSc in Behavior Change at UCL. And we teach that knowledge on its own isn't enough to change our behavior. We learn from doing, we learn from practicing, and we learn from engaging in an activity. So for each of these 24 strengths that I talk about in my book, I also offer several different behavioral exercises to help the reader build up that particular strength. And today in my talk, I'm going to give you a brief overview of 3 different strengths. And I'm focusing on personal strengths in my talk today because I think they'll be particularly helpful for you dealing with the ongoing pandemic. And I'll also offer you one behavioral practice that will help build up that strength. New slide.
Okay.
So the first strength, oh, I don't see it, but the first strength,
There we go. There we go.
oh, there we go. No. The first strength I want to talk about is self-compassion, which is such an important personal belief that helps build resilience. And self-compassion is not the same as self-esteem. In other words, it's not thinking positively about yourself or liking yourself because you have certain traits or because you have special qualities or because you did something really great. Self-compassion means you accept and you feel compassion toward yourself just because of your intrinsic worth as a human being. When you are self-compassionate, you view your failures in the context of the larger human experience, rather than seeing them as something that's isolating you or separating you from others. You know, sometimes we irrationally think that it's only me that's having a hard time, but we're not alone in our struggles. You know, it's a basic fact of life shared with every other person in this world. As humans, we fall flat on our face now and then, and actually that's just normal. As women, we often are really great at showing compassion toward others, but self-compassion is often harder for us. You know, we tend to have really high expectations of ourselves, and it's not so easy for us to accept our mistakes and our imperfections. But self-compassion means that we treat ourselves just as we would a good friend. In other words, when we're going through a tough time, we aren't down on ourselves, we aren't critical with ourselves. Instead, we offer ourselves kindness and non-judgmental understanding.
So would you say that if somebody's in a very dark place, they need to think what they would do for a friend in the dark place and push themselves to do something for themselves?
Yes, you definitely think of yourself as a good friend. But I'm going to give a strategy in a minute.
Great.
Ruthie. So self-compassion is really especially important, just like Ruthie said, when we're experiencing something stressful. You know, during challenging times, our lives are not going to reflect our hopes and our aspirations. Here in the UK, we've experienced 3 successful lockdowns, and going through this, you know, we might not have had the neatest and most organized house. We might not have been able to exercise as often as we were before. Back one, please, Ruthie.
Back or?
Back one on the slides.
Back one.
So we might not have been able to exercise as often as we were before. You know, our workload was falling behind. We might not have always been the most engaging parent or creative cook or thoughtful spouse. And sometimes, you know, we might have felt pretty lousy and even miserable. But when we're self-compassionate, we avoid impossibly high self-expectations and we accept our own imperfections. And this acceptance helps us to keep our stress levels down, which is so important right now for our mental health, especially during this period that's really difficult and really stressful and really uncertain. So I know what some of you are probably thinking right now. You're probably thinking, wait a minute, can't you be too self-compassionate? I mean, won't you become self-indulgent or unmotivated or even lazy? But actually, research suggests this isn't the case. You know, and research finds that people who are self-compassionate tend to have even greater personal initiative to make necessary and positive life changes. And you might ask yourself, what's the reason for that? Well, if you think about it, when you're self-compassionate, you don't berate yourself when you fail. You don't struggle in the face of imperfection and outright failure, which we all experience from time to time. I mean, we're human, life is messy, and we make mistakes. But when you're self-compassionate, you accept failure as part of a learning process. And here's the important part. You reflect on what you can do differently next time, and you adjust your tactics, and then you try again. Self-compassion isn't an excuse or a rationalization, and it's not about feeling sorry for yourself. It's not a self-pity or a woe is me attitude where people become immersed in their own problems and they forget about others. Instead, self-compassion recognizes, as humans, we all suffer, and it fosters a connected mindset, including other people. It's an acceptance that the purpose of our life is not about perfection. It's about learning and growing and connecting with others. It's about moving forward with something that's healthy and positive. Being self-compassionate is something that's really encouraged in Judaism. As Ramban says, he who bestows good on his own soul is a man of loving kindness. In Judaism, a key part of our life is to learn from our mistakes, to try harder, and to consistently work on being a better person. But we can only do that by accepting our errors and understanding them, and not being defeatist. Instead, our mistakes are opportunities for growth. And Yom Kippur is a great example of self-compassion. On Yom Kippur, what do? We examine our misdeeds and we reflect on our behavior over the past year. We're focused on teshuvah, which means to return. We strive to return to who we really are, which is like God. We are created in God's image, and goodness is at the core of our being. We make mistakes, but those mistakes do not define us. They do not constitute who we are. We sincerely reflect and regret our misdeeds on Yom Kippur, and this gives us a clean slate, so to speak, and it paves the way for positive growth and new beginnings. There are so many different ways to encourage self-compassion, and I discuss many different ways in my book. But one evidence-based strategy that I want to share with you today is called positive self-talk. Did you ever notice that you have a running dialogue in your head all day long? Stop for a moment and listen to what yours says to you. What does your inner voice say? What does your inner voice say to you when you look in the mirror? What does your inner voice say to you when you make a mistake? You spill that oil all over the kitchen floor. Make sure that inner voice encourages you and supports you and doesn't put you down. We so wait to hear validating statements from our family, our spouse, and our friends. But why do you need to wait? You can be your own cheerleader. Look in the mirror and really look at yourself, and look at yourself compassionately. And say aloud to yourself statements that you really need to hear. You are doing all right. You can do it. Keep trying. You are still working on that, and you will get there. Or even, I accept you and I love you. Now, this might sound silly to you, but this strategy has really been shown to work, and there's evidence that it does. So I suggest that you definitely try it if you want to boost your self-compassion. You can also encourage self-compassion by reminding yourself that you have a special purpose. So often as women, we judge ourselves by our physical presence, like those numbers on the scale, our accomplishments, or even mundane things like whether our house is clean and whether the food we cooked for Shabbos is delicious. But we're so much more than that. We are spiritual beings. Next slide, Ruthie. So I'm just going to have a quick drink of water. I have 2 more personal strengths to go through.
A little bit of self-care there. Huh?
Exactly. Oh, I'm going to give myself a little hug like the picture. Okay, so another important personal
I just want to interrupt. When you say you're giving yourself a hug, is that a good thing to, that might be a good thing
Yeah,
to do
it
for a
is,
person,
it
because
is.
you said it's not enough about just thinking it, but we have to do something. So we should put an
Yeah,
action to
you
our
can.
thoughts.
You can. And actually, touch influences our reaction, our sympathetic system. So yes, definitely give yourself a little hug if you need to, whenever you do. It's definitely a good thing to do.
I know
So-
I put, right before lighting Shabbos candles, I put really delicious smelling moisturizer all over my hands. And that also makes me go in feeling self-care and really wonderful. That's another.
And you also, you know what else, Ruthie? You also probably identify that smell now with Shabbos coming in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so another important personal strength that boosts our resilience is called learned optimism. And learned optimism is basically a habit. It's a habit of viewing ourselves and the world in a positive light. And it's a belief that good things will happen to us and bad things are temporary. Now, this contrasts with the concept of learned helplessness. And you might have heard about learned helplessness from early and unethical experiments conducted with dogs. So these experiments found that dogs who were exposed to repeated electric shocks, prong collars, or brute force really started to emotionally shut down. And they reached a state of learned helplessness. These dogs, they wouldn't even try to escape when they were shocked, and they became completely passive, even when there was escape route available to them. And in a similar way, people can also become learned helpless, especially when we're faced with a continuous negative circumstance and we don't see an end in sight. We can believe that nothing's going to make a difference and the situation that we're in is permanent. So we stop trying and we accept this difficult situation as just the way life is, even when we have the ability to do something about it, to make that change. But what's important to know is that learned optimism and learned helplessness are learned thought processes. And what I mean by that is we can unlearn them and we can learn them. So research finds that even people who are pessimistic can learn to have a more positive and optimistic outlook on life. In the Mishnah, the ability to develop a positive outlook is referred to as an ayin tova, and this literally means a good eye. The significance of an ayin tova means we can train ourselves to see the good in people and in situations. And having a positive outlook is especially important to bolster our resilience when we're facing difficult times. And as you might expect, research finds that people who are more optimistic have better health outcomes and cope better with adversity. So how do you know if you're a learned optimist or not? Can you do that test half full, half empty glass? Well, not really. What you can do is you can start by examining your explanatory style. And your explanatory style is how you interpret and explain events that happen in your life. And according to Martin Seligman, who's considered the father of positive psychology and who developed the idea of learned helplessness and learned optimism, you can analyze your explanatory style according to 3 Ps. And this is personal, pervasive, and permanent. So personal is when you see an event as having an internal cause, and pervasive is believing that this event happens in all areas of your life. And permanent, well, that means that things don't change. So someone with a pessimistic outlook would explain bad events as being their own fault or internally caused, something that happens in all areas of their life and something that's permanent. So let me give you an example. So let's say you're on the mobile phone and you're driving and the person in front of you brakes really suddenly and boom, you hit the back of that car. Now I want you to think for a moment. How would you explain that event in your head? Someone who tended to be learned helplessness might say, I wasn't driving carefully. I'm such a careless person. This kind of thing happens to me all the time. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. What about someone who leaned toward being a learned optimist? They would see this bad event in a completely different light. They might say, that person kept calling me while I was driving, so I answered it. I was momentarily distracted, but next time I'm definitely using my headset, I'm not answering the phone, right? So impersonal, applicable to that specific event, and impermanent. So what about a good event? We would expect to see the opposite explanatory style. So we'd expect that someone who's learned helpless would see a good event as impersonal, specific, and impermanent. while someone who's learned optimist would see the same event as personal, pervasive, and permanent. Let me give you another example. So let's say that you apply for a new job and you're given that offer. What would you say to yourself? A person who leaned toward learned helplessness might say, no one else applied who was qualified. I was in the right place at the right time. I was really fortunate and hopefully I won't mess up. And personal, specific to that situation and impermanent. But what about a learned optimist? They might say, I was the best person for this job. I try really hard at everything I do, and that's why I'm so successful. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. So how can you use this research to help you be more optimistic? Well, think about the next time that something really challenging happens to you and consider your own explanatory style. And if you find that you're leaning toward being pessimistic, then switch it around. And I suggest that you create a chart, just like I did in the slide, and write down your original interpretation as being personal, pervasive, or permanent. It doesn't have to be all three, it might just be 2 out of 3. And then change it. So you write down a view and event that's impersonal, specific to that situation, and impermanent. So come up with explanations that fit that other explanatory style that's optimistic. And the same holds true for a good event. If a good event happens to you, write down your personal event, your personal role in that good event, how it applies to other areas of your life, and consider it something that will be lasting.
I think I would say, thank goodness I got the job, but I would thank Hashem. Wouldn't it be a little bit narcissistic to say, hey, I'm the best? Or is it good for us to say, hey, I'm the best?
Well, there's no problem in thanking Hashem. That just shows a lot of gratitude, which is another personal strength that I'm not talking about today, Ruthie, but you're right. A lot of these strengths really do overlap and they blend together. I'm only talking about 3, but there's so many, and gratitude is definitely one of them. So thanking Hashem would be a very good way of building up our gratitude. Okay, so another important personal strength for resilience that's being able to direct another important personal strength for resilience is being able, you can switch slides, I'm sorry, is being able to direct our thoughts and our emotions in a positive and productive direction. And one way we can do this is through mindfulness practice, because this can help us deal with stressful situations in an active way. And research shows that those who engage in mindfulness practice have better psychological outcomes than those who don't engage in the practice. So when we learn how to be mindful, what we do is we identify non-productive thought patterns and negative emotions, and we learn to actively redirect them in healthy and positive directions. So, you might catastrophize sometimes, and this is when we focus on the worst case scenario for any given situation. Or, we might get stuck on that same recurring thought pattern, kind of going in a loop and holding you back. Or, you might feel that familiar panic that kind of rises up in your throat and gets stuck right here. And, when you confront stressful situations, and that's being aware of your thoughts and your feelings. But when we're mindful, we are aware of these thoughts and we're feelings, and we learn to label them, but then we learn that we can let them go. And there's a lot of different mindfulness practices, and I talk about a lot of these in my book. But here's one that I find really personally really helpful, and I want to share it with you today. I want you to begin. Try to do this with me now. I want you to begin by thinking of a thought or an emotional situation that's really taken a hold of you recently. So, you might be upset or worried about something that you don't really want to be worried about it, and you're fighting it in your head. Or you might feel disappointed, or you have an emotion that you don't think you should be having, so you're trying to suppress it. But you just can't help it. Now, all this fighting with our thoughts and suppressing our emotions, it's really draining, and it takes a lot of energy. So instead of fighting with these thoughts, instead of suppressing our emotions, we can acknowledge them and then we can let them go. We can separate ourselves from them. So again, think back to that difficult thought or that nagging emotion that you had recently, and imagine it's not in your head and it's not in your heart. Imagine it in your hands. Now open up your hands and visualize that emotion or that thought in your hands. And then close your fists tight. Now you can slowly open your hands and you can lift them to the ceiling, and you visualize these thoughts, these emotions float away like butterflies or bees or airplanes or whatever feels good to you. Recently, I've also started blowing these emotions away, like actually physically going, and that helps as well. And the truth is, these emotions, these thoughts, they might return, and that's okay. You can go through this practice again. Or you know what else you can do? You can say to these emotions and these thoughts, when they return to you, you can say, you know what, thank you, but I'll pass this time. I don't need you anymore. Mm-hmm. And this mindfulness practice, it teaches us that our emotions, our thoughts, they come and go. In fact, recent psychological research finds we have 6,200 thoughts in a day. But it doesn't matter. Our thoughts don't need to control us. We can control them. We can let our negative thoughts and our negative emotions go. And when we do, we have more room for positive thoughts and positive feelings. Being mindful coincides with the Jewish conception of time. Sometimes we feel like our lives are going in circles without moving forward. And this is particularly true for many people right now, because those key events that mark our days, our weeks, and our months are often absent during the pandemic. We're not going to bar mitzvahs, we're not going to weddings, we're not going out to dinner, we're not going on vacations. And many people have noted that, every day seems to be like the next. But our sages teach us this isn't the case. We may experience similar events in time, but each moment has a unique spiritual energy which allows us to achieve what is needed at that particular point in time. And rather than being circular, these moments link in a spiral, circling upward toward ever higher dimensions of spiritual growth. And this teaches us that our lives require our full and mindful attention. Don't let your time be hijacked by negative emotions or thought patterns that hold you back. Instead, be mindful of the inherent goodness in each moment and consider, how can I make this moment meaningful and impactful in a positive way? And sometimes that might just be a smile, or the way you phrase a text or an email, or just reaching across the table and touching the arm of someone you love, or even just saying, Baruch Hashem, for this moment. Thank you, Hashem. Each and every moment has an opportunity for growth and positive connection. Last slide, please. So let's just take a few minutes and reflect on what we've been talking about. And also think back to what you wrote in that first exercise. And in light of what you wrote, in light of all your own experiences, especially over the past few months, in light of all the knowledge that you have about yourself and your life, ask yourself, what advice would I give to myself right now to boost my resilience? And how can I utilize all my unique strengths to build up my resilience and the resilience of those I love? And what do I still need to work on? But remember, you are the expert of your own life. You have the capacity to seek the help that you need and discover what works for you and what doesn't. No matter where we live in the world right now, it's challenging for everybody. And we're experiencing so many fast-paced changes and high levels of uncertainty. Change is difficult. It can bring a sense of loss, insecurity, and complication. But at the same point in time, change can bring hope. It can bring hope for a new beginning, a renewed connection, and a greater realization of what's possible and what we can achieve. Your resilience is essential to successfully navigating through the experience that we're having now or any challenging period that you're going to face in your lifetime. I wish you a huge amount of strength on your journey, and I really thank you for taking the time to listen to me today.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Leslie. That was fantastic.